Speaker.
Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I rise to take a call on the Christian Churches New Zealand Property Trust Board Empowering Bill. But, Mr Speaker, before I do, I think there are a couple of comments by the past speakers that deserve just a little bit of rebuttal. Mr Ducey suggested that perhaps these churches need to come to his election Waimakaweri, and I ask, is that because of the growing number of disenfranchised people who the government has forgotten about and who the member refuses to advocate on behalf of, because there is a growing underclass in Waimak and therefore the church is needed there to pick up the slack where the government has slacked off? The other thing I also note is Mr Bishop wondered if we could do this bill better, or if there are private members' bills that don't need to come to Parliament. I would like to remind Mr Bishop that in fact democracy isn't confined to large corporates or social housing providers. This is a house for all New Zealanders. And I believe that private members' bills do actually play a very important part in democracy. And it is important that they do go through the robust processes that Parliament affords. So I would be loath to see any change to Parliament hearing private members' bills. The other thing, Mr Speaker, is I listened to Alfred Naro's speech. He's a nationalist MP. And do you know what I thought? I thought that is a speech from a Labour member. That is a speech from someone who understands community values. No, not only understands community values, but champions community values and principles. Alfred Naro spoke about the intent of this bill. He talked about his role as a lay preacher. And he isn't the first to hold that esteemed position in this House. In fact, there are a number from within their communities who have been lay preachers who have come here to make a difference. In fact, two Labour leaders, in Walter Nash and Arnold Nordmeyer, were also lay preachers. In fact, it's the common consensus is that first Labour government was not social democratic, it was actually Christian Democratic Party because it preached the Christian values and principles at the heart of their philosophy, let alone their drive to create a better society.
Yeah, I'm now going to interrupt the member and say that, as with a number of other members, he's given a good run around history, but 3 minutes into a speech, it would be good to refer to the bill.
3 minutes already. but one thing I'd like to, well, as mentioned, Mr Speaker, this bill, and it's been mentioned by I think every speaker, this bill does replace the Associated Churches of Christ Church Property Act of 1929. But whenever I see a bill like this, which is, you know, as everyone has admitted, it's non-contentious and basically just changes the legal structure under which assets are held, I always just have one question. And I think it was answered by Minister Smith, but my question is whether all members of all parishes actually agree to the change of structure. And I think they do. That's the impression I've held. Obviously, the legal implications from changing the structure alter, but it's still bound by all the deeds and the contracts and the obligations of the old trust. In fact, it appears through reading the bill that very little has changed except the actual name. And again, we just need to know that every parish member or every parish that is part of this actually agreed to it. And that is why, actually, that private members' bills, why it's so important they do go through a robust process, so we make sure this isn't one large group sort of steamrolling over a group of smaller ones. I also note that things change over 85 years. Back in 1929, who knew what was going to happen in 2015? They set up the structure 85 years ago to meet the needs of the times, and times have changed. And it's quite interesting to reflect on this. Obviously, back in 1929, the country was in the grip of recession. There was record unemployment. People were worried about their jobs, their future, their children and their families. Although some things change in 85 years, I think if we reflect, some things don't. 85 years later, the Labour leader gave a speech in this House today about child poverty, about the minimum wage, about the Kiwi dream, about jobs, about home ownership, about education, about a future. Because today people are still worried about their future, where we have a commission for work because we don't know what work's going to look like. The same issues that were around in 1929 when the first bill passed through Parliament, are still as relevant today. And the thing about the churches is they are still there picking up the pieces of a government that has lost touch with the community. And this is the case today. I think the churches do a fantastic job, and I applaud them. I think the churches do a necessary job, but what we are seeing more and more is churches picking up the slack where the government has dropped the ball. And this is absolutely the case today. And it's one of the reasons why I'm proud to speak about this, because anything that gets the church structure to a point where it is best to serve, well, is best utilised to serve the needs of the parishioners, of the people. In fact, if we're honest about this, the vast majority of people that churches serve these days are not actually their parishioners, they're members of their community that they have taken in and cared for. This is what churches do, because that government has failed a whole lot of people in our community. Mr. Speaker, I do support this bill. Why wouldn't you? But I would also like to say congratulations to the churches and the wonderful work they do in our communities. Thank you.